let's maybe just kind of start with those first two wars that you talk about in your book, Chechnya and Georgia. Although I think you talk about Yugoslavia a little bit too. But maybe let's start with Chechnya because that was really Putin's first war.
Mhm.
Can you just real quick talk about how did this war start? How did it begin? What was going on in Russia at the time when this started? And I think there are actually two Chechnya wars.
There are, I mean, and it's a very dangerous question to ask someone who sort of considers himself primarily a historian, because precisely I want to, if you ask when it starts, I want to say, well, 200 years ago. I mean, but suffice to say that the Chechens, a particular people of the North Caucasus region, right in the south of Russia, very fierce, very strong reputation for being independently minded. They were brought into the rule of the Russian Empire in the 19th century and essentially had periodically rebelled whenever they felt that there was an opportunity. Stalin, being Stalin, adopted a rather maximalist response to this, and during the Second World War, almost entirely over one night, he had the whole Chechen population rounded up and removed by force and scattered across Kazakhstan, Central Asia, and Siberia, a process in which a large number of them died. And it was only after Stalin's death that they could actually return home. But still, one can understand quite why the Chechens for a long time looked for their opportunity. Now, in the 1990s, before Putin's reign, under Boris Yeltsin, when frankly the Russian state was very, very weak, they spotted an opportunity. Under former Soviet Air Force commander called Dudayev, they declared independence. Yeltsin wasn't willing to allow that to happen because he was afraid that this, what is after all a multi-ethnic land empire, could possibly fragment if he seemed to be perfectly capable of just simply waving goodbye to the Chechens. And what happened was, from the Russians' point of view, a disastrous, catastrophic blunder. The Chechens proved to be not just very tough, and let's be perfectly honest, I mean, from my perspective and my very first research in my doctoral program, I did my thesis on the impact of the Soviet-Afghan war. Well, frankly, tough as the Afghans are, frankly, I think the Chechens would more than give them a run for their money. And what happened is, in effect, tiny little Chechnya, by virtue of how it fought as guerrillas on the battlefield and also by launching terrorist attacks within Russia, essentially forced Moscow to a draw. Now, that wasn't a situation that could be allowed to continue. And so, even before Putin was president, when he was still prime minister briefly, he was responsible for rolling into place the start of a new campaign, a much bigger, more properly arranged one. And one also in which, and you mentioned that you hadn't really sort of known much about it, the state made a much greater effort to control the narrative and limit who actually could go and report. It was a very, very brutal, I mean, civil wars tend to be, but even by the standards of civil wars, we saw the capital of Chechnya sort of leveled in the same sort of way that we're now seeing Ukrainian cities being sort of hammered flat.